The Constitutional Convention. So they're going to go to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1787, and they're going to rewrite the Constitution. So the first Constitution was the Articles of Confederation. It was very weak. It couldn't do a lot of things. It was intentionally wrote to be weak because they were afraid of giving anyone too much power. So they go to the Constitutional Convention, and the first thing that they decide to do is they decide to create three branches of government. Now, they didn't create these out of thin air. The state constitutions already had three branches of government because the state constitutions were really strong. So, like North Carolina already had a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch. So this one was kind of an easy fix. Like they realized, okay, the state constitutions are doing it, the federal constitution should too. So they created the three branches of government. The legislative creates laws, the executive is the president who supposedly enforces laws, and the judicial branch is the court system, and they judge the constitutionality of a law, and it's also the ones that would decide consequences and punishment of someone breaking the law. So each branch's power is checked by another branch so that they would not have too much power, especially the president. You don't want the president having too much power because that gets very similar to what they were doing when they were owned by England with having the King George III. So here are just a few examples. And when you do your stations for the Constitutional Convention, you'll see a big infograph of checks and balances that'll show you how each one checks another. So the executive branch approves or vetoes laws made by Congress. So the executive branch is the president, and he can either approve or he can veto a law that is made by Congress, which is the legislative branch. So Congress, the legislative branch, makes laws, but that law doesn't become effective or doesn't become a real law until the president actually signs it. Now he can veto the law, so he's checking Congress's power. If he vetoes it, Congress can then go back and check his power by overriding his veto, but they have to have a lot of people voting to override him. So that's one example. So then, like the court systems, the executive branch appoints Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court. But he can't just pick people that are like his BFFs and just go with it. The legislative branch has to approve the people that he appointed. So he can't just, pick his neighbor or his trash driver or whatever. He has to pick people who are going to have, background history, who would be a good person to be a judge, and who's kind of worked their way into that position, and the legislative branch will approve that. So the president can mobilize troops. So let's say that, North Korea, President Obama wants to declare war on North Korea. Now he can send troops there, but he has 60 days. If Congress doesn't declare war in 60 days, the troops have to come home. So Congress actually declares war. The president cannot declare war. Imagine having that much power. If one person could declare war on another country, that would be horrible. So Congress, which we'll talk about how many people that is in a minute, Congress actually is the one that declares war, and the president can mobilize troops prior to that happening. So another way of checks and balances is called federalism. So federalism is the balance of power between the state and the federal government, and that gets really tricky. So here are certain powers. So delegated powers are things that only the federal government can do. So think big picture, United States of America. So like if you go to Virginia, you don't have Virginia money. You don't have New Jersey money. You don't have Florida money. It's United States currency. We use it throughout the entire country. That's because that's a delegated power. Only the federal government can create money. Only the federal government can declare war. North Carolina can't declare war on France. Like we can't just up and declare war. And the federal government can regulate trade with other nations. There are a lot more. These are just a few examples. So like, again, North Carolina can't decide to start trading with England or North Korea or China. So it's done country to country. So the federal government controls that. Now, there are some reserved powers that the state does. So for one, education. That's why if you've ever moved states, the education stuff is a little different per state because the state decides on education, like your requirements, whether you're being tested, like how many tests you have to take. All of that is a state decision. Marriage laws. That's why the whole issue with like homosexual marriage was such a big deal and why some states allowed it and some didn't. Now, that's went to the Supreme Court because they were saying that was discriminating against people's like freedoms. So that's like challenging the Constitution and people's rights. But before that happened, it was just considered a state decision. So marriage in general, like getting a marriage certificate and the requirements and how much you have to pay. You have to pay to get married. So those kind of things are all reserved for the state to decide. So like North Carolina's marriage laws are a little different than South Carolina's marriage laws. Concurrent or shared powers. So those are things that both the federal government and the state can do. So for example, they both can tax you. So like my paycheck, I have state taxes and I have federal taxes. They both come out. They both can create laws. So like the United States has laws that you can't, if you break them, you're going to get punished. But like North Carolina has laws that other states don't have. And sometimes we have some really silly laws. You can look up silly laws and see some crazy silly laws out there that only exist in that state. So those are just a few examples. And there are a lot more. And again, in that blend space that you do on your stations for Constitutional Convention, you'll see it's like the compare and contrast circles, and you'll see the different powers. It's like federal powers on the left and state powers are on the right, and in the middle it shows you the shared powers that they both can do. So that's a really good image for you to look at as well, and these are just a few examples of that.